a dusty canvas jacket, a scuffed pair of steel-toed boots, a little girl tightly holding her father's calloused hand. When Thomas stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the city's most elite bank, they treated him like garbage. They told him to leave. Instead, he smiled, swiped his card, and shattered their reality. The rain in Seattle had been coming down in cold, unforgiving sheets since dawn, turning the city's bustling financial district into a blurry canvas of grey. For most of the wealthy patrons stepping through the grand, polished brass doors of Oak Ridge Sovereign Wealth Management. The weather was merely an inconvenience, brushed away by valets with massive umbrellas. But for Thomas Wright, the rain had soaked right through his faded canvas work jacket, chilling him to the bone. Thomas didn't look like he belonged at Oak Ridge. He looked like a man who had spent the last 10 hours under the chassis of a diesel truck, which was exactly what he had been doing. His knuckles were permanently stained with motor oil, his jeans were frayed at the hems, and his steel-toed boots left faint, damp footprints on the immaculate Italian marble floor. Clinging tightly to his left hand was his 7-year-old daughter, Claire. She wore a bright yellow raincoat that was a size too small, and her left sneaker was held together by a neat strip of silver duct tape. As soon as the heavy oak doors closed behind them, shutting out the roar of the city traffic, the atmosphere in the bank shifted. The grand lobby was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over rich mahogany desks. The hushed conversations of men in bespoke Italian suits and women draped in designer cashmere stopped for a fraction of a second as they caught sight of Thomas. A collective silent judgment washed over the room. Claire squeezed his hand, her large brown eyes darting nervously around the cavernous room. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's really fancy in here. Are you sure we're in the right place? The man at the door is looking at us." Thomas glanced over his shoulder. The bank's armed security guard, a burly man who looked more like a bouncer at a high-end nightclub, was already speaking quietly into his earpiece, his eyes locked on Thomas. "We're in the exact right place, sweetie," Thomas said softly, offering his daughter a warm, reassuring smile that hid the exhaustion aching behind his eyes. "We just need to check on something, and then we're going to get the biggest pepperoni pizza in the city for your birthday. I promise." He walked purposefully toward the main teller counter, ignoring the side eyes and the subtle scoffs from the waiting lounge. He approached a teller station manned by a young woman whose golden nameplate read Cynthia. Cynthia had perfectly manicured nails, hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and a smile that vanished the moment she processed Thomas's appearance. "Excuse me," Thomas said politely, keeping his voice even. "I need to check the balance on a recent wire transfer and make a withdrawal." Cynthia didn't immediately respond. She let her gaze travel from the oil stains on his collar, down to Claire's duct-taped shoe, her upper lip curling into a barely concealed sneer. "Sir," Cynthia began, her tone dripping with the kind of practiced corporate condescension reserved for bill collectors and telemarketers. "I believe you are confused. This is Oak Ridge Sovereign. We do not handle retail banking standard checking or government assistance checks. The public branch of City Trust is located 3 blocks down, next to the bus station." Thomas didn't flinch. He had spent the last 8 years of his life swallowing his pride, taking the lowest-paying mechanic jobs, and eating instant ramen just to keep Claire in a good school. He was immune to the petty judgments of bank tellers. "I am aware of where I am, Cynthia," Thomas replied smoothly. "I have an account here. I just need you to run my card and check my balance." Cynthia let out a sharp, breathless laugh, looking to her left to share a glance with a colleague. "Sir, please. Our minimum account balance just to open a portfolio at this branch is $5 million. If you don't leave voluntarily, I will have security escort you out." To understand Thomas's absolute calm in the face of this humiliation, one had to understand his past and his connection to a woman named Beatrice Croft. Beatrice Croft was a name that commanded sheer terror and awe in the global financial sector. She was a billionaire CEO, the ruthless founder of Croft Capital, known for hostile takeovers and an ice-cold demeanor that had landed her on the cover of Forbes 3 times. But to Thomas Wright, Beatrice was the woman who had stolen his life. 8 years ago, Thomas wasn't a grease-stained mechanic. He was a brilliant algorithmic engineer. He and Beatrice had co-founded a proprietary, high-frequency trading platform. Thomas wrote every line of the code. Beatrice secured the venture capital. But the night before their company went public, Beatrice orchestrated a devastating corporate coup. She forged documents, locked Thomas out of the servers, and weaponized a team of corporate lawyers to bury him. She framed him for intellectual property theft, leaving him bankrupt, blacklisted from the tech industry, and fighting a grueling custody battle for his infant daughter after his wife abandoned them under the financial strain. Beatrice became a billionaire CEO. Thomas became a ghost changing oil in a damp garage. But Thomas never stopped fighting. Every night after Claire went to sleep, he studied corporate law. He tracked Beatrice's financial web. He found the original source code logs she thought she had deleted. After 7 years of building an airtight, undeniable legal case, he had cornered her. Faced with federal prison for corporate fraud, the great billionaire CEO Beatrice Croft was forced to settle out of court, completely off the books. The settlement was finalized this morning. Today was the day Thomas Wright took his life back. "I'm not leaving, Cynthia," Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a quiet authority that briefly unsettled her. "Swipe the card." The tension at the counter had attracted the attention of the branch manager. Lawrence Fulton stepped out of his glass-walled office, smoothing the lapels of his custom Tom Ford suit. Lawrence was a man who prided himself on maintaining the pristine, exclusive environment of Oak Ridge Sovereign. Seeing a mechanic dripping rainwater onto his imported marble was an insult to his sensibilities. "Is there a problem here, Cynthia?" Lawrence asked, coming up behind the counter. He didn't even look at Thomas. He looked at the wet footprints on the floor with utter disgust. "Mr. Fulton," Cynthia said, her voice instantly shifting to a sycophantic purr. "This gentleman refuses to leave. He's demanding that I check his balance, despite me informing him that this is a private wealth management facility." Lawrence finally turned his gaze to Thomas. He took in the faded jacket, the rough hands, and the little girl hiding behind her father's leg. Lawrence offered a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator cornering a wounded animal. "Sir, I am the branch manager, Lawrence Fulton," he said smoothly. "I understand that times are difficult, and occasionally people wander in here by mistake. But we manage high net worth portfolios. We don't cash payroll checks. We don't process overdraft fee reversals. And we certainly don't tolerate disruptions. Now Jenkins here is going to walk you to the door." The security guard stepped forward, his hand resting conspicuously on his duty belt. "Come on, buddy. Let's make this easy in front of the kid," Claire whimpered, burying her face into Thomas's leg. Thomas reached down, gently stroking his daughter's hair. "It's okay, Claire. Nobody is making us leave." Thomas stood tall-looking Lawrence dead in the eye. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a wallet held together by black duct tape. The juxtaposition of the ruined wallet against the pristine bank counter was almost comical. Lawrence scoffed audibly. From the plastic sleeve of the wallet, Thomas slid out a card. It wasn't a standard plastic debit card. It was heavy forged from matte black metal. It had no bank logo, no embossed numbers, and no flashy holographic seal. It just had a secure microchip and a thick magnetic stripe. He placed it on the marble counter with a heavy metallic clink. "Run it," Thomas said to Lawrence. "You're the manager. You have the authorization to check a black-tier private routing account." Lawrence stared at the card. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He recognized the weight and texture of the metal. It was the exact type of proprietary card issued exclusively to the top 0.01% of the bank's global clientele. But looking at the man standing in front of him, Lawrence quickly suppressed the thought. It's a novelty card, Lawrence decided, his arrogance blinding his judgment. A fake he bought online to pull a stunt. Lawrence let out a loud theatrical sigh, making sure the affluent clients in the lobby could hear him resolving the nuisance. Fine. You want to play games? Let's humor you, sir. Cynthia, run the gentleman's card. Cynthia picked up the heavy metal card, rolling her eyes, and slid it through her terminal. Immediately the screen on Cynthia's monitor flashed bright yellow. A harsh electronic beep echoed behind the counter. Lawrence chuckled. Ah, just as I suspected. Flagged for fraud, or perhaps a severe negative balance. You see, Mr. Wright, our system automatically locks out fraudulent materials. To even view the rejection code for this, it requires a manager's biometric override. Then override it. Thomas challenged, his eyes locked onto Lawrence's. Lawrence shook his head, thoroughly enjoying the power trip. I'm going to print the denial slip, keep this counterfeit card, and then Jenkins is going to call the police. You really shouldn't have brought your daughter into this mess. Lawrence placed his right thumb onto the biometric scanner next to the keyboard. The machine whirred. The yellow screen turned momentarily black. The loading icon spun for what felt like an eternity. Cynthia leaned back, preparing to print the eviction notice. Then the screen flashed a brilliant solid green. The security lock disengaged. The client dossier cascaded across Cynthia's monitor in crisp, bold text. Account name: Wright Thomas J. Account type: Sovereign Apex Holdings Tier 1. Status active / cleared. Cynthia's jaw went slack. The smug smirk instantly melted off her face, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated shock. She blinked hard, leaning closer to the monitor, her nose almost touching the glass. What is it? Lawrence snapped, annoyed by her hesitation. Just print the fraud report, Cynthia. Mr. Fulton. Cynthia stammered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at the screen. You need to look at this. Lawrence huffed impatiently and leaned over her shoulder. His eyes scanned the first few lines of the dossier. He saw the Apex Holdings status a tier reserved strictly for billionaires and sovereign wealth funds. Then his eyes dropped to the transaction history that had just cleared 3 minutes before Thomas walked through the doors. Incoming wire, transfer, $47 million. Routing origin, Croft Capital, L. LC authorization. Beatrice Croft. CEO Personal Acquisition Fund. Lawrence's breath caught in his throat. His heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that name. Beatrice Croft wasn't just a billionaire CEO. She was Oak Ridge Sovereign's largest, most intimidating corporate client. Lawrence practically worshipped the ground Beatrice Croft walked on. And the terrifying, untouchable Beatrice Croft had just personally authorized a $47 million transfer into the account of the grease-stained man standing in front of him. Finally, Lawrence's terrified eyes drifted down to the total available balance. Available liquid balance, $47,034,219.85. The silence behind the counter was deafening. Lawrence felt the blood drain completely from his face. His knees suddenly felt weak, and he had to grip the edge of the marble counter to keep himself from swaying. The custom Tom Ford suit suddenly felt suffocatingly tight around his neck. Thomas Wright leaned casually against the counter, resting his calloused hands on the polished mahogany. He looked at the pale, paralyzed manager and the trembling teller. "Now!" Thomas said, his voice calm, clear, and cutting through the silence of the bank like a scalpel. "I need to withdraw $200 for my daughter's birthday dinner. Crisp bills, Lawrence, and I'd like an apology to my little girl for making her wait." The silence that descended upon the grand lobby of Oak Ridge Sovereign Wealth Management was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a violent storm. The gentle hum of the crystal chandeliers and the distant, muffled sounds of Seattle traffic suddenly felt incredibly loud. Lawrence Fulton, a man who had spent his entire adult life climbing the cutthroat corporate ladder by stepping on anyone earning less than 6 figures, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish pulled from the water. The blood that had drained from his face left his complexion a sickly, pale grey. Behind the counter, Cynthia was trembling so violently that her gold bracelets clinked against the mahogany desk. She looked wildly between the computer monitor, displaying the impossible sum of $47,034,219.85 and the oil-stained, exhausted father standing before her. Jenkins, the burly security guard who had been mere seconds away from physically laying hands on Thomas, possessed the street smarts that Lawrence and Cynthia severely lacked. He didn't need to see the screen to know that the power dynamic in the room had just violently inverted. Jenkins slowly, carefully took his hand off his duty belt and took 2 large, deliberate steps backward, melting into the shadows of a marble pillar. I, Lawrence stammered, his polished aristocratic accent completely disintegrating. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically above his tight silk tie. Mr. Wright. Sir. There has clearly been a catastrophic misunderstanding on my part. On our part. Thomas didn't move. He kept his hands resting on the counter, his posture perfectly relaxed. I asked for $200, Lawrence, crisp bills, and an apology to my daughter. Pride is a heavy burden, but the sudden realization of one's own insignificance is an anvil dropped from the sky. Lawrence scrambled to comply. He practically shoved Cynthia out of the way, his manicured hands frantically opening the high-security cash drawer. He fumbled with the bands of $100 bills, his fingers shaking so badly he dropped a stack onto the floor. He didn't bother picking them up. He peeled off 2 pristine, uncirculated $100 bills and placed them on the counter with the utmost reverence, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. Then Lawrence rounded the counter. The branch manager of Oak Ridge Sovereign, a man who routinely made state senators wait in the lobby, stepped right up to 7-year-old Claire. He fell to one knee, ignoring the fact that his custom trousers were soaking up the dirty rainwater dripping from Thomas's boots. "Young lady," Lawrence said, his voice cracking with genuine terror. He forced the most obsequious, desperate smile he could muster. "I am incredibly, deeply sorry. We were terribly rude to you and your father. It was unacceptable. I hope you can forgive my ignorance, and I wish you the happiest of birthdays." Claire peeked out from behind Thomas's leg, her brow furrowed in confusion. She looked down at the terrified man kneeling in the puddle, then up at her father. "It's okay, mister," she squeaked, tightening her grip on Thomas's hand. "Daddy says people who are mean just have sad hearts." Lawrence flinched as if he had been slapped. He stood up slowly, wiping his sweaty palms on his thighs. "Mr. Wright, please. Allow me to invite you to the private Platinum Lounge. We have vintage champagne, a private chef. Let me assign our senior wealth management team to your portfolio immediately. We can restructure this capital to ensure maximum tax efficiency." "Stop," Thomas commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut Lawrence off completely. Thomas picked up his heavy black card and slid it back into his duct-taped wallet, tucking the $200 into his shirt pocket. "You don't understand the situation, Lawrence," Thomas said, leaning in slightly. "I didn't come here to do business with you. I came here because Oak Ridge Sovereign is the primary corporate holding bank for Croft Capital. Beatrice Croft holds her private acquisition funds here. I knew the wire transfer would route through this specific branch faster than any other institution." Lawrence nodded vigorously, desperate to agree with whatever Thomas was saying. "Yes, exactly. Our routing architecture is the fastest on the West Coast. We are perfectly equipped to handle this volume of capital. Thomas smiled, but it was a cold, tired smile. I don't plan on keeping it here. I've spent 8 years watching people like you treat people like me as if we are invisible. I've watched Beatrice Croft use institutions exactly like this one to bury honest people in debt and legal fees. I just needed the funds to clear the firewall. Before Lawrence could formulate a plea, the heavy brass doors of the bank swung open with a resounding crash. The cold Seattle wind howled into the lobby, bringing with it 3 figures dressed in immaculate dark-tailored suits. Leading the trio was Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was Beatrice Croft's apex predator. As the senior partner of the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in the country, Arthur was a man who made his living destroying lives. He was tall, silver-haired, and possessed the cold, dead eyes of a shark. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, and his 2 junior associates flanked him like loyal foot soldiers. Arthur's eyes immediately locked onto Thomas. He ignored the stunning architecture of the bank, ignored the bewildered, wealthy clients staring from the lounge, and marched straight toward the teller counter. "Right," Arthur barked, his voice echoing sharply off the marble. "You're a difficult man to track down. I should have known you'd be huddled in a bank, desperately waiting for the screen to blink." Thomas calmly turned to face the lawyer. He pulled Claire slightly behind him, shielding her from Arthur's aggressive energy. "Arthur, you're out of breath. It looks like you ran all the way from the courthouse. Don't play games with me, mechanic." Arthur sneered, stopping a few feet away. He snapped his fingers, and one of his associates immediately placed a thick stack of legal documents on the marble counter next to Lawrence. Arthur tapped the stack with a gold Mont Blanc pen. "Beatrice authorized the transfer an hour ago. But the settlement isn't finalized until you sign the absolute non-disclosure and non-compete agreements. We filed the injunction to freeze the funds 5 minutes ago. If you don't sign these papers right here, right now, I will tie that $47 million up in appellate court until your daughter is in college." Lawrence Fulton, watching the exchange, suddenly felt a glimmer of hope. If the money was frozen, Thomas wasn't a Tier 1 client yet. He was just a guy with a pending disputed wire. Lawrence's spine stiffened his arrogant smirk, threatening to return. But Thomas just laughed. It was a rich, genuine laugh that echoed through the tense lobby. "You filed an injunction?" Thomas asked, shaking his head. "Arthur, you're slipping. Beatrice must be furious." "Sign the papers, right?" Arthur demanded, his face flushing red with anger. Thomas stepped forward, invading Arthur's personal space. The scent of motor oil and rain mixed with Arthur's expensive cologne. "Let me explain something to you, Arthur," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious register. "You and Beatrice assumed I was desperate. You assumed I just wanted a payday. But you forgot why Beatrice stole my algorithm in the first place." Thomas turned to Lawrence, who was now sweating profusely again. "Lawrence, pull up the clearance code on my account. Read the exact timestamp of the final ledger clearing." Lawrence scrambled to the monitor, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The funds officially cleared the federal holding matrix at 10:14 a.m. The balance is entirely liquid and fully vested," Arthur scoffed. "A temporary glitch. My injunction was filed at 10:12 a.m. The bank will lock it." "No, they won't," Thomas said, turning back to Arthur. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single folded piece of standard printer paper. He handed it to the high-powered lawyer. Arthur unfolded it, his eyes scanning the page. As he read, the arrogant scowl on his face completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. "You," Arthur whispered, his hands beginning to shake. "How did you do this? While you were busy filing an injunction in state court to freeze a cash transfer," Thomas explained, his voice ringing out for the entire bank to hear. "I used the proprietary back door in the trading algorithm, the one I wrote, the one Beatrice stole, and the one she never fully understood, to execute a massive automated short sell of Croft Capital's secondary holdings." Thomas pointed to the paper trembling in Arthur's hands. That $47 million wasn't just a cash settlement. It was the exact liquidity I needed to cover the margin requirement. 5 minutes ago, I executed the trade. I didn't just take Beatrice's money. I took her leverage. To make it perfectly clear to everyone in the room, Thomas broke down the reality of the situation. The Croft Capital reversal strategy, asset project, Aegis high-frequency trading algorithm. The flaw. Beatrice forced the tech to scale without understanding the foundational code, leaving a blind spot in overseas routing. The move. Thomas used the $47 million settlement to instantly leverage a $500 million short position against Croft Capital's overvalued tech subsidiaries. The result: if Beatrice attempted to freeze the settlement funds, she would inadvertently trigger a default on her own corporate debt, collapsing her empire by the closing bell. Arthur Pendleton, a man who had never lost a negotiation in his life, looked like he was about to faint. The documents sitting on the counter were completely worthless. Thomas hadn't just beaten them in court. He had financially checkmated a billionaire CEO using her own money. "You're a monster," Arthur hissed, though the fear in his eyes betrayed his bravado. "No," Thomas corrected gently. "I'm an engineer. I fix broken systems, and Croft Capital was fundamentally broken." Thomas turned back to Lawrence and Cynthia, who were now staring at him as if he were a god walking among mortals. "Lawrence," Thomas said calmly, "I want you to initiate a wire transfer, $46,999,800. Send it to the Claire Wright Blind Trust, routing number provided on my file." Immediately, Mr. Wright, Lawrence breathed, his fingers practically flying over the keyboard. It will be done before you leave the building." "And the remaining balance?" Cynthia asked, timidly, desperate to be helpful. "Keep it in this checking account." Thomas smiled. "I might need to buy some more duct tape later." Thomas reached down and took Claire's hand. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder, oblivious to the high-stakes financial war that had just been won, but completely aware that her father was the strongest man in the world. "Come on, Claire," Thomas said, turning his back on the shattered lawyer, the groveling bank manager, and the marble cathedral of wealth. "I think we've kept that pepperoni pizza waiting long enough." As Thomas and Claire walked toward the heavy brass doors, Jenkins, the security guard, hurried forward. He didn't reach for his radio. He didn't glare. Instead, he pulled the heavy oak door open with a respectful nod. "Have a good day, Mr. Wright," Jenkins said quietly. "Happy birthday, kiddo," Thomas nodded back. He stepped out into the Seattle rain, the cold wind no longer biting, but feeling incredibly, wonderfully refreshing. He was no longer a ghost. He was no longer the victim of Beatrice Croft. He was just a father, taking his daughter to dinner, leaving a multi-billion-dollar financial institution in absolute chaos in his wake. What an incredible story of ultimate revenge and redemption. Thomas proved that true intelligence and unwavering patience can outsmart even the most ruthless billionaire CEOs and arrogant bank managers. He didn't just reclaim his stolen wealth, he secured his daughter's future while staying completely true to who he is. If you loved this satisfying tale of karma and brilliance, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life dramas.